to the Buddha Dharma TV. I am Agnes Gay. Tonight, we start our show with the Nara Siha Gatha, also known as the stanzas on the Lion of Man. These verses were recited by Princess Yasodhara, the wife of Prince Siddhartha, to their son Rahula. She shared them during the Buddha's first visit to Kapilavatthu, his hometown, after attaining his enlightenment. Today, the second part of these verses will be recited by Visarada Sirima Ratnayaka, a renowned singer from Sri Lanka. We are thrilled to present Buddhist nuns who possess deep understanding of the Dhamma, eager to disseminate their insight to peace-loving listeners across the globe. To commence this series of Dhamma discourses by Buddhist nuns, we are privileged to have the Venerable Bhikkhuni Niroda from Australia to continue her sermon on the message of the Buddha. This is the second part of her sermon.
Let me give you another example now. All of us, I'm sure, have gone to a cinema to watch a film, to enjoy a movie. I'm sure you have all seen that beam of light coming from the projector towards the screen. There were no actors, actresses, or cars, botanical gardens came in that light beam. It was just a beam of light. When it comes and when it gets projected on the screen, you will see different shapes. And now you have your mind will identify, oh, that's that beautiful actress. That is that handsome actor. Right? And now you will form a story. All you got was a set of shapes on the screen. But you can see cars, beautiful gardens, flowers, and all these things. Now you will have Lobha, Dosa, and Moha, and you are entangled based on the story that you have compiled yourself. Right? Now you might have anger towards the enemy and empathy towards the couple who are fighting for their love and so on. Okay? But if you want to go and hug a beautiful actress that you can see on the screen, or you want to shake hands with a handsome actor that you can see on the screen. If you try to do that, what happens? You go, when you try to do that, you will be able to touch the screen. But you come a little bit away from the screen, you can see all this wonderful world on the screen. So can you see that we make, or the mind makes all these formations? And even though you look outside like this, you're not seeing the outside world, because the formation, everything to do with the seeing is done at the same way that you are seeing the picture, the film, is how you see the world. You look at, let's say, your son or daughter, and you go, oh, you come here, my daughter, and you're going to hug her. What you're doing is just like the screen, you are touching your son's or daughter's hand, but this is Patavi. The son's or daughter's hand is also Patavi. Doesn't know what it's touching. Patavi is just Patavi. Okay, this is just a set of muscles and bones. It doesn't know anything. Same on the other side. When this touches this Patavi touches the other part, then you have the Kaya Vinyana, right? The mind comes into existence, and the mind will tell you, if you have stored it, mind will tell you, oh, you are touching your daughter's hand, your son's hand. But if you cannot recognize because you have not stored that, then you have to ask someone. Like, how you haven't met your friend for a long time, now you can't remember the name, and you look at that person, even though you can't see that way, you keep looking and you keep searching your database. The eye is very innocent. Eye is a camera, cannot do anything other than just getting the image, just capturing the image. Actually, it helps to get the image onto the retina. That's all. All the other things are done within the mind. The problem is we are trying to project that mental formation to the outside world because we don't know about this process. So that is called avijja. Because of avijja, we have attachments to the outside world. That is called bhavatanha. You don't understand the process. Because of that, you have avijja and bhavatanha. Because of avijja and bhavatanha, and because the mind accepts the fact that an outside world exists, you will be having, or there will be lobha, dosa, and moha. Sometimes you might go, I'm a very neutral person. I don't have any issues or any attachments, or I don't have any anger towards anyone. I have upekha, equanimity, right? But you still have moha because you still accept the fact, the mind still accepts the fact that person is outside. The person that you are displaying a neutral feeling is still outside. So then you have still moha. So you will have avijja, bhavatanha. Because of that, you have lobha, dosa, moha. And because of the way that you are seeing the world, you will see the world as nitya, means permanent, subha, atma, right? And like the four viparyasas. Okay, instead of you are saying anitya, dukkha, anatma, you will see them as permanent, nitya, subha, sukha, and atma. Okay? Because you think that the outside world is permanent. Okay, you don't understand the mental formation. So these 9 words, what are the 9 words? Avijja, Bhavatanha, Lobha, Dosa, Moha, the four vipalasas, which are Nitya, Subha, Sukha, Atma. These 9 words have been explained in the Dhamma as the 9 words of Akusala, 9 words that explain Akusala. So if you understand the 9 words and you remember, that is great. But that is knowledge. What is more important is to understand the fact that this is how we are in the samsaric journey, how our samsaric journey is formed and kept on forming, kept on unfolding. Right? In other words, this explains the first 2 noble truths. Okay? What happens, the suffering and the reason for suffering. Okay? So actually, Sabba Papa Sakarana, the first line actually explains how we get into the samsaric journey. How are we going along this samsaric journey? The first 2 noble truths. Then the second line, which says Kusalassa Upasampada, explains the third and the fourth noble truths. What does that mean? That means if you want to get out of the samsara, what is the process? The process is samatha and vipassana. Samatha means you're trying to still your mind, calm your mind. There are 40 meditation techniques that Lord Buddha has explained in the Tripitaka. So you use one of the techniques based on your character type to make sure that your mind is still. And then you do vipassana. So samatha, vipassana. So when you do samatha and vipassana, you will be leading, or that practice will lead to alobha, advesha, amoha. Alobha, adosa, amoha. And now instead of the vipalasas, because of this practice, you will see the word as anitya, dukkha, anatma, asubha. Anitya, dukkha, anatma, asubha. So there's also 9 words. What are the 9 words? Samatha, vipassana. That practice will lead to alobha, adosa, amoha, and that will help us to understand the world as it is, which is anitya, dukkha, anatma, asubha. Now these 9 words explain the kusala, kusalassa upasampada. Also, this explains the third and the fourth noble truths. So this gatha explains that when you understand dukkha and dukkha samudaya, that is, those are the first 2 noble truths, and try to develop the practice through samatha vipassana, what is the result? You will be able to purify your mind. So that is the essence of the gatha. This actually explains how the Four Noble Truths, the realization of the Four Noble Truths, help us to eradicate all suffering. So, what you have to do, even though we don't have a lot of time, we want to understand. We all know, as we all know, that attachment is the cause of all suffering. But it is not possible to eradicate all attachment without eradicating avijja. Whenever you have avijja, you will always have tanha. So you cannot actually get rid of attachment. The solution is to get rid of avijja. How do we get rid of avijja? First method is to listen to Dhamma. Understand this process. Go to a Kalyana Mitra. Ask the Kalyana Mitra to explain Dhamma, understand Dhamma, contemplate Dhamma. And why do we do Kayagata Sati, the 32 body part contemplation? That is to prove to your mind, challenge your mind, even though the mind says, oh, Amma is in outside, Tata is outside, and all that. No, when you go that way, what you have only only Satra Mahadhatu. So 32 body parts, that contemplation of 32 body parts help us to understand what really exists in the outside world, which is different objects which are all made out of Satra Mahadhatu, and they are formed in the space with different shapes. That's all. So the more and more the mind realizes that, then it understands that all these formations are done in your mind. It's like a magic trick. This is why Lord Buddha says, Maya upamacha vijnana. Mind is like a magician. So this is like a magic trick that has been formed by the mind. So the more you understand, the more you try to penetrate and understand deeply what actually exists outside, then you understand that then your mind will accept the fact that all the formations are in this side. So that then we have to. There is another. We have to then start help the mind to realize what's going on. First, you have to start by realizing what is outside. That is just a glimpse of what the practice should be. But mainly what I wanted you to understand is Sakkaya Ditthi is what happens is when the mind formation is being projected to the outside world. That is why we find that the outside world exists. And every time something changes in the outside world, the Satra Mahadhatu objects change, they dissolve, they cease to exist, we suffer. Right? And in the deathbed, what happens is, let's say you suddenly, in your last moment, you suddenly remember your son or daughter. Now, if you are not at the level of Sotapanna, you don't know anything about this. You go, oh, I wish I can see my daughter or son. You either have lobha or dosa, or you still have moha because you accept the fact that the daughter exists in the outside world. Then you have that desire or you have that anger. Based on that, now because you want to see, you want to interact with that object, not the object, the son or the daughter, but you can't be in this body. This body ceases to exist, and because of your desire to interact with the outside world, you will be born again. It's not technically okay to say you will be born again, but there will be another pratisandhi, rebirth. Okay, so that's how we go into the next life, and so on and so on. The only way to stop this cycle is to understand how the mind is formed, how the mind forms the values, and how the values are getting projected to the outside world. So I hope you understand this to a certain extent, what Sakayavritti means. There were some other examples that I wanted to discuss, but there's very little time left, so I would leave it for the time being. But I do hope that this Dhamma talk will help you to form the basis to understand what Sakayavritti is, and to understand in a simple way the practice and how to get rid of Sakayavritti. So, thank you.
Look for such a hymn by awakening. It is lovely, meaningful, and appealing tones resonate with listeners. Let's indulge in some soul-stirring music by awakening. Alone in the still of the night, I stand, struggling deep inside. Who am I? Where will I go? Why am I so afraid? With tears in my eyes, why am I so lonesome with fear in my heart? Alone in the still of the night, vision of victory realized. Why am I feeling so low? Must success create the sorrow of mine? Why can't they quench my lost and searching heart? Maybe someday, somewhere, somehow, wandering ceases when wisdom dawns and truth to hold. To the sage of old, with folded palms I humbly bow. A weary traveler, returning to Nirvana's fold. Alone in the still of the night, dwelt I on worldly greed and pride. Why must wealth, hate, and war so? I search for peace insights into a frequently asked question. What is early Buddhism? Let us welcome Venerable Arya Dhammika from Austria to elucidate on this topic. This session marks the second part of his enlightening sermon.
Not through the Vinayas, it's the Abhidhammas where the most and main difference lies. In the Kinti Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya 103, monks are disputing about the Dhamma. Instead of talking about it, they're disputing about it. And here the word Abhidhamma is used, even in the Sutta. What does it refer to? Abhidhamma here refers to the 37 Bodhibhakya Dhammas, to the factors of awakening, like Noble Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, 5 powers, 5 faculties, and so on. And the Pali commentaries also say the same. The word Abhidhamma, when it's used in the suttas, does not refer actually to the Abhidhamma Pitaka, but to these teachings about the Dhamma. Abhi can also mean about. So the commentary here says, refers to the 37 Bodhibhakya Dhammas, to the factors of awakening. So it's also worth noting that the early scriptures, almost all occurrences of the term Abhidhamma, is always coming along, or often, with Abhi Vinaya. Have you heard this term before? Abhi Vinaya? Yeah, it's not uncommon. But if somebody says Abhidhamma refers to the Abhidhamma Pitaka, to the books of the Abhidhamma, where's then our Abhi Vinaya Pitaka? We only have one Vinaya Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka. We don't have an Abhi Vinaya Pitaka. So again, it is about the Vinaya. Or if you want to use the word Abhi as higher, you can say the higher Vinaya, the higher discipline, like the Bhikkhu Patimokkha for the monks. But it's not a separate corpus of texts. So this is already something what we would say, which we can say from comparative study, that since the differences are so huge and almost no commonalities among these schools, it means most likely, and scholars agree actually, it's not even a controversy, that the Abhidhamma developed much later, developed when the schools had already separated. And only then the different Abhidhammas developed. That's why there's no common core of the Abhidhamma. Whereas they still have the common core of the suttas and the Vinaya, because that's how it started. Yeah, okay. What's the role of the commentaries? Actually, the commentaries' role is to explain, to commentate on things that we find in the other main material. And also to give a background setting of a certain sutta, for example. One example would be the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata. And the Pali tradition, we find there a lot of verses, like in the Dhammapada is also only verses. So the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata also consists of verse style, whereas the narratives, the stories around these verses are preserved in the commentary, in the Pali commentaries. However, the Chinese version, we see that these two were conflated and they are both together. So in the Chinese equivalent, we see a conflation of these two separate texts where the prose coincides with the verses. They come together. And the same cross-contamination or cross-fertilization, if you will, occurs also in the Udana. It's a different book of the Pali Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, where the opposite is the case. This time the Pali version has the verses mixed with the prose, while the Sanskrit version maintains only the verses. Again, from this comparing Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese versions, we can learn about these differences. Okay, so this was now the framework about how this field works and what is the background of it. But I know nobody, or most of you will probably not become now Pali scholars, because if you want to do comparative study, you have to know Pali, yes, but also ideally Chinese very well, classical Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, Prakrit. Many other Indian fragments are found in different languages. It's not easy. But nowadays we can rely on translations often. So it's getting easier and easier. But then you may ask, and that's what I asked, okay, what are the important takeaways? Give me a case of important finding that we learn from early Buddhist studies. Let me give you one. Have you heard about the decline of the sasana? And as a perspective, and it's actually quite commonly known and prevalent, that the sasana will disappear, the Buddha's dispensation, after a certain period of time. And it's said to be 5,000 years. So the commentaries on the Vinaya Pitaka and also the Anguttara Nikaya, the commentaries there, said that there will be 1,000 years for arahants who attain analytical insight or even psychic powers. So for the first 1,000 years of the Buddha's dispensations. That's already over, you know. Now we are already 2,500 years after. So only for the first 1,000 years, arahants, there can be arahants who have analytical insight. Then follow 1,000 years for arahants without those attainments, like psychic powers, remembering past lives, but they can still be liberated. It's the second 1,000 years. That's also over now. Now, the next 1,000 years, they are for non-returners only. So you can become at most a non-returner. And then 1,000 years for once returners. And then 1,000 years for stream winners only. So then after these 5,000 years, the true doctrine, the true Dhamma, disappears gradually. At first only the texts will be remembered, but nobody will practice anymore. But the text will still be around, the pariyatti, the learning. And then after that, even the texts disappear, and only some signs, some traditions, some rituals will remain. Maybe some people will still remember, oh, it's important to practice generosity. But that alone will not lead to liberation. So this is how, according to the Pali commentaries, the Dhamma will disappear in stages. So if we look back now, we are already more than 2,000 years after. This means, however much you practice, you can't become an arahant anymore. At most, you might become an anagami, if you're lucky. Now, comparative study, both looking at the Pali Suttas, this is not found. Nowhere is it at this 5,000 years. It's not found anywhere in the early Buddhist texts. It comes only in commentaries, sub-commentaries. There are even different versions of what I've just explained to you. Even they don't agree upon each other. So none of this gradual disappearing with these stages is outlined in that detail. Yes, that the Dhamma will disappear gradually, that is also explained by the Buddha, but not with these years. So why is this important? Well, this belief has been, this understanding, many people have followed that. And until recently, including nowadays still, many monks, particularly in Sri Lanka, have this view that nowadays you don't have to practice. These times are over where you can become an arahant. What you do nowadays is make married and go to heaven, and maybe if you're lucky, you find some Aryas from before, from the earlier days. Maybe some Sotapannas or Sakadagamis who have been reborn in the Devaloka. And then you can hear the Dhamma from them. and then start practicing there, and maybe get in attain awakening. So because of this view, because of this perspective, what will happen? No point in practicing. No point in making effort, going into seclusion. No point in meditation. Just make merit, go to heaven. So this is a very consequential view and belief that prevents and blocks people from practicing. And generations of monks, not just lay people, also even monks, have fallen for that and have given up on the practice. And even nowadays, I have met monks, not long ago, a year ago, I've spoken with a monk who holds exactly this view. Nowadays, you can't attain. Some even say you can't attain anything. And some say you can't attain awakening, but you can maybe get to the lower Arya stages. But that's nonsense. It's not true. And there's none of the early texts verify that. That's important. Because if somebody believes that, that will prevent that person from practicing and getting the fruits that he might have been able to get and obtain. I'll give you a last one, an example along similar lines. So some Mahayana schools of Buddhism hold that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they manifest in the world in order to liberate others. And then they return to their pure abodes and to their pure land. So the question can arise whether a bodhisattva is awakened already or not. Because if he only manifests here to teach and then he goes back to the pure land, then he's kind of like a Buddha. So he just shows up, helps us, and then he goes back. However, in the early texts, the word bodhisattva is never used in reference to a Buddha or somebody who is awakened already. In fact, the only way how this is referred to in the early texts is this. Let's look at the next slide. In the suttas, the stock phrases, every time when the Buddha speaks about the bodhisattva, about himself, he says, before my awakening, while I was still an unenlightened bodhisattva. Unenlightened. It's not somebody who is a Buddha who comes back to teach. He's unenlightened. He doesn't know the Dhamma himself, most likely. So a bodhisattva is not somebody who is already far advanced. And even the Buddha himself refers to himself as bodhisattva only in his last birth. Only in his last life, in the life in which he became a Buddha. There's no early text where the Buddha refers to himself as a bodhisattva from previous life, like from 100 years ago, 1 eon ago. No, it's only in the last life when he enters the mother's womb. At that time, he says, the bodhisattva enters the mother's womb mindfully and fully aware, and has his birth then later. So it's always an unenlightened being. And we see that the Buddha often, whenever he speaks about himself, having been a bodhisattva, you can see that he was grappling with unwholesome states, such as fear, that when he was living alone in the forest, or sometimes he was lured in and attracted by sensual objects, by sense desires, because his mind didn't get settled in renunciation. That was before his awakening, when he was still only a bodhisattva. And he also had the whole host of wrong views, even undergoing body modification of the body, ascetic practices, in his search of awakening, not knowing what is the path and what is not the path. So clearly, bodhisattva is not an awakened being. So then related to that, the question arises, so was he destined to become a Sammasan Buddha? If the bodhisattva starts only in his last birth, then what about the whole bodhisattva path? Didn't he After all, didn't he perfect the paramis for these incredibly long periods of time in order to become a future Buddha? Well, an interesting discourse in this context is the Arya Pariyesana Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya 26. Right after the Buddha attains Nibbana, straight afterwards, he surveys the world, but he finds little hope in teaching the Dhamma to others. So he's at first not inclined to teach. The sutta says, enough, the Buddha reflects after awakening and says, enough with teaching the Dhamma that even I found hard to reach, for it will be never understood by those who live in lust and hate. Those died in lust, wrapped in darkness, will never discern this abstruse Dhamma, which goes against the worldly stream, subtle, deep, and difficult to see. So he says, very difficult. Nobody will understand this Dhamma. Considering thus, my mind inclined to inaction rather than to teaching the Dhamma. That's what the Buddha thought about doing. Inaction, not teaching. Then the Pali Sutta continues to say, that because the Brahma Sambhati knew with his mind, the thought in my mind, and then he requested eventually the Buddha to start teaching, because there are some people with only little dust in their eyes. So the Buddha's first reflection, I find it very interesting. His first reflection after awakening was how teaching the Dhamma to others will be troublesome for himself, and he inclined not to teach. He decided, I'm not going to teach. However, the Pali commentary doesn't feel very comfortable with that. And it tries very hard to explain these passages away. To say that Brahma Sambhati had to come because Buddhas don't start to teach on their own, so they need an invitation from Mahabrahma. And that's why the Buddha first said, I don't want to teach. And then when Mahabrahma came, then he agreed. And the commentaries say, this is like a law, general law for all Buddhas. When they become awakened, Sambhati shows up on your doorstep and says, please teach. But that is in conflict with the sutta, with the passage I was just reading out. The Buddha says, my mind inclined to inaction. And he was thinking, nobody can understand it. So what the commentary says is the Buddha is lying here. Because when the Buddha says his mind was inclined to inaction, to not teaching the Dhamma, he didn't say, I just want to get Mahabrahma to come up and invite me. He says, I wanted not to teach. So you cannot say, oh no, that's not what the Buddha really meant. He meant something else. The Buddha is not lying. But it's understandable why the commentary tradition has a big problem with that. Because if the Buddha does not teach, or cannot teach, can decide not to teach, this means that there's no bodhisattva path cultivated over a long time where he will then eventually become a Buddha and teach the Dhamma to others. So there's a problem with that. So it's understandable why the commentary is tempted to explain this away. Even though I find personally not so successful, but okay. So now let us look at the same passage in the Chinese parallel that is found in the Agamas. And I will read it out to you. I didn't bring it in your slide, but I will just read it out to you. The same passage from Majjhima Nikaya 26, but this time from the Chinese parallel. Listen carefully. Having just awakened to the supreme, right and complete awakening, I thought, the Buddha thinks, to whom should I first teach the Dhamma? I further thought, should I now first teach the Dhamma to Alara Kalama, which is one of his earlier teachers, who he knew is a very advanced practitioner? At that time, there was a heavenly being up in the sky who told me, great sage, may you know that Alara Kalama passed away 7 days ago. Then I also came to know for myself that Dalai Lama had passed away 7 days ago. If he had heard it, he would have quickly understood the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. That's the passage. Do you notice? Do you notice something missing? Something not there? Where is Mahabrahma? Where is Mahabrahma inviting the Buddha to teach? Not coming. Did he forget about it? In the Chinese parallel version, the whole incident of Mahabrahma inviting the Buddha to teach is not there. That's interesting. So this invitation that the commentaries make so much of is not even found in the parallel version. So some say a bodhisattva should aspire to liberate the complete world. But then, there's a sutta in Anguttara Nikaya. The question is this reasonable, or is this likely? Is it possible that a bodhisattva, that you can make a vow, and is it achievable to liberate all beings from their suffering, and only then you also attain parinibbana? Is this possible? Well, in Anguttara Nikaya 10.95, there's a wanderer with the name of Uttiya. And he asks the Buddha if all, or half, or a third of the beings in the world will be liberated by his teachings. And then Ananda replies, saying that Tathagata has no concern whether the entire world will be liberated, or half of the world, or a third of the world. That's interesting, huh? So even the Buddha, he's already awakened. Even this is his last life. He's not thinking, I will liberate the whole world. Those who are here can listen to the Dhamma and practice and benefit from it. But there's no thought about liberating everyone. The Dhamma is pretty much meant for your own purification. In short, neither a bodhisattva path nor a bodhisattva ideal is found in the early discourses or their parallels. We've been looking, people have been studying that deeply. It's not found. No bodhisattva path in the early discourses or their parallels. Nor is there a definite prophecy from a previous Buddha found there, which also many of us have heard that you get a prophecy, a definite confirmation that he becomes the next Buddha. Also not found in the early text. Furthermore, even these 10 parami or 6 parami, how to have them in Mahayana, in the Theravada tradition, we have 10 parami. Even the 10 paramis are not found in the early Buddhist texts. Isn't that interesting? Now the word parami itself is found, of course. It means completeness or perfection, or the highest state. But it never refers to a list of 10 qualities that a person should develop in order to become an arahant or a future, either a Pacceka Buddha or a Sammasambuddha. I'm sure many of us have heard about this famous list of the 10 paramis: dana, sila, virtue, generosity, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patient endurance, truthfulness, determination, loving-kindness, and equanimity. Now, all these qualities are actually very good and important qualities, and they are mentioned many places in the early texts, but not as a set, and not as something to develop to get liberated or to become a future Buddha. That does not exist. So we have suttas where the Buddha speaks about the benefits of metta, or about virtue, but not as a means to become a future Buddha, nothing like that. So the context how this word parami comes up into suttas, for example, is in Theragatha 1193. Mahamoggallana says, a member of the Moggallana clan, attained to perfection, parami, attained to perfection and mastery in samadhi and knowledge, wise in the teachings of the unattached, with serene faculties, has burst his bonds like an elephant burst a rope of creeper. So here the word perfection, parami, is used, but how is it used? He is attained to perfection and mastery in samadhi and knowledge, in concentration and insight. It does not speak about the 10 parami. So this is a very common down-to-earth usage of the word. So why am I emphasizing this so much? Why is this important? Well, again, not only in the Mahayana schools, even in the Theravada school of Buddhism, many monks, nuns, lay followers, male and females, aspire to become future Buddhas and undertake a bodhisattva vow to practice and stay in samsara, basically, for the sake of becoming a future Buddha and help others attain liberation first. Or some form of this idea. But the bodhisattva path and perfecting the paramis is not found anywhere. All that the Buddha praised is getting enlightened straight away as fast as you can. Like your head is on fire. It's a famous simile. The Buddha says you should not be lazy. You should practice as if your hair were burning and your head is on fire. That's the urgency with which we should practice. Right? If your head is burning, it's not that you will say, well, let me have a rest now. I will make out this fire later. I'll have a nap first, and then I have a good meal. And next week I'm free to make out this fire. No, you make it out straight away. You put this empty cup of water over your head, or a full cup of water maybe, and you make it out. So there's never any suggestion of the Buddha where he would say, it's good to postpone your liberation for later. But this is exactly what happens. This is exactly what happens. Many, many monks, good monks, sincere monks, because the goal is not liberation anymore. The goal is to help others get liberated rather than oneself. So they get engaged in activities that are not geared towards liberation. It can be social welfare, building schools, building hospitals. It's all good things. It's wholesome. But it's not what monks are supposed to do. Monks, actually, we should strive for liberation. And let the Buddhist lay followers do these kinds of wholesome acts. It's good. We need people to do that. But then that's not the path to liberation, and it's also not what the Buddha recommended as the highest goal. It's very important to have the goal inside. What are we practicing for? Liberation. Very simple. And because when people do not have this goal, well, it becomes a distraction. We won't practice. Well, maybe you want to go to heaven. Practice then. It's always tomorrow, later. That's a problem. So with comparative study, we can identify, wow, it's amazing. We've checked also many suttas, parallel versions, not found. No bodhisattva path, no paramis to develop to become a future Buddha, no prophecy of the previous Buddha. Amazing. So this is not just small scholarly things that are not so relevant. They're very relevant for many practitioners in Buddhist countries, but also non-Buddhist countries. Okay, I've talked a lot already. Let me draw a small conclusion now. Comparative study at first shatters your faith not only in the Abhidhamma or the commentaries, but even in the Bali discourses. It shatters the faith because even the Bali suttas we cannot completely trust. Even those can have undergone some evolution, some corruption, And by putting them side by side, sometimes you find more correct versions in the parallel version. So by doing this kind of study, not on your own, but maybe you have heard from others, it undermines a little bit this almost naive trust in the Pali Suttas, the earliest teachings, almost like an MP3 recorder next to the Buddha. That's the Pali Suttas. No, even they have undergone some minor often, but some degree of development, usually in the course of oral transmission very early on. So first, the faith is shattered to some degree in the Abhidhamma commentaries and even the Pali Suttas. But then it gets partly re-established, or you get a more grown-up version of it. It's not anymore blind belief, but now there's understanding, because from this comparative study, we know how much is actually consistent. And it is truly amazing how over so many centuries these texts were maintained with such a high level of consistency, just by oral transmission for so many years. That we find differences, yes, but they are very minor often. And as I said earlier, maybe the sequence a bit different, but often it's really small, minor things. Seeing that, my faith became re-established in the Pali Suttas as well. But not anymore this naive belief, yeah, it's exactly the word, there can be nothing wrong, but a more grown-up version we can have, where we understand, oh yeah, this is our earliest complete corpus of texts, but we can still benefit from comparative study and get some nuances corrected. I hope in this talk I could foster some interest among some of you for this, to me, very interesting field of Dhamma studies. And while we don't have enough time for that today, but those of you who are particularly interested in how early Buddhism and comparative studies are related to meditation, and you want to check out sources of not only about this more Dhamma perspective, but also how can we use these early Buddhist texts also as our guide, as our main source for meditation. I have something for you. Now let us look at these slides here. There's two books that I can highly recommend in this context. They've been both written by Venerable Anario, a German scholar, monk, and also very sincere practitioner. And both books focus on meditation and mindfulness, but from an early Buddhist perspective. So where different texts are put side by side and the commonalities are found, and the practices that are found within all of them, we would consider to have a good chance to be the authentic teachings of the Buddha. The first one is called Early Buddhist Meditation Studies, and the other one is called Mindfulness in Early Buddhism. Highly recommended if you want to know also about how to put all this knowledge into practice. Venerable Baladhamika, who is a resident monk here in SBS, he once said that the goal of comparative study is not to tear down what we know from the Pali Canon, but to improve our understanding of the Dhamma wherever there is obscurity or uncertainty. So it's not about dismissing anything, but to improve our understanding in areas where we are not so sure. To me personally, this whole field is a bit like undergoing medical treatment or an operation. Before you undergo a big operation or a friend recommends you a medicine, don't you do one thing first? Many of us, what we would do is, I would go to ask for a second opinion, especially if it's a big or long treatment or a big operation. We go to ask for a second opinion, or maybe even a third opinion. That's exactly what we are doing with comparative studies. We're asking for a second, third, or fourth opinion by comparing texts and seeing the similarities. And then we put in our trust into those texts that have a high probability of dating back to the historical Buddha himself. So the results of such studies are not meant to be sufficient in their own right, but they can and should influence also one's Dhamma practice, both on the meditation cushion, but also in daily life. So to me, in this way, refuge in the Buddha and his teaching comes to life. The Buddha and his teaching, the Dhamma as he was teaching it, becomes meaningful and fulfilled in our hearts. This is what the refuge in Buddha and Dhamma is all about. So thank you for your attention. Okay, first question. Does this lead us to conclude that early Buddhism equates original Buddhism? Thank you, Bante. Is early Buddhism the same as original Buddhism? Probably it depends on what you mean with these words. I would say early Buddhism is an attempt to get as close as possible to what the Buddha originally was teaching. But we cannot go back in time like with a time machine, because even these texts, even if you put these texts side by side, they still come from a period starting maybe 200, 300 years after the Buddha's Parinibbana. So we cannot go earlier than that. There's nobody alive, as far as I know, from that period. If you know, please send him over to me. I'm very interested to talk to him. But here on earth, we have nobody alive who is still alive from that time. So we rely on these early texts. So this is what we mean with early Buddhist studies, early Buddhism. Yeah. There's another question. So here, can we also say that there are inconsistencies in Abhidhamma Pitaka scriptures? Well, if you have been listening, probably this is what one can say. There are inconsistencies even in the suttas. But as I said earlier, by comparative study, putting the Abhidhammas of different schools side by side, they are so different from each other that it seems almost no common core. Whereas the suttas and the Vinaya have very little differences, and they're very similar to each other. But the Abhidhammas of different schools are very different. So applying the principle of what is common has a good chance to be early. If we apply that principle, then the logical conclusion would be, this is what most scholars anyway say since many years, that the Abhidhamma is a historically speaking later development, which is attempting to explain the Dhamma in systematic ways and going to ultimate realities, leaving conventions behind. But this is an attempt that has grown and developed gradually and was not found in the very earliest strata of teachings. That's why we didn't have a Abhidhamma Pitaka at the very beginning. Next question. In your view, how many % error in the transmission of original teaching to the current scripture now? How high is the percentage? So let us speak only in this context. I have already now explained about the Abhidhamma. Let's speak about the comparison between the Pali version and the Chinese version of the Majjhima Nikaya, for example. There's a very good book, a comparative study of the Majjhima Nikaya, also published by the same scholar, Venerable Anarya, where he has highlighted and marked down all these differences. And this is very comfortable because I personally, I can't read Chinese, not to speak of classical Chinese. Yet it has been translated into English and he's done all this difficult work of comparing. So I can read, and we can read now, the differences among these versions. And my general impression is that the differences are very few, far in between. So, generally speaking, I would say the Pali Suttas, as well as the Agamas, are very reliable. But there are some relevant differences. And even when it comes to practice, for example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, if you put all the versions of the Satipatthana Sutta side by side, not just Pali and one, or not just the Chinese, but also all the versions we have, because Satipatthana Sutta is a very popular discourse, so it was spread very widely, and we have quite a number of parallels. I think 5 or 6 identified parallels. And if you look at which practices are they having in common, interestingly, just to give you one example, in the Dhammanupassana section, contemplation of Dhammas, among all the different practices we have in the Pali version, there's only 2 practices that all versions share in common. Which are they? Number 1, the practice of identifying the 5 hindrances and knowing also the causes and conditions, how they are come to be and how to overcome them. And the second practice is about the 7 awakening factors. Again, how to make them arouse, what are their conditions, and so on. These are the 2 practices, the only 2 that are found in all parallels. So that I find interesting because, well, there's so many teachings and so many practices already. Sometimes you have to make a choice anyway. You cannot practice everything every day. So for me then, why don't I choose a practice that is found everywhere in all the Buddhist schools, that has a high probability of being an early teaching of the Buddha? And then these other practices I can also do from time to time. There's nothing bad about them, but I would put my emphasis on those practices that I have trust, that they date back to the Buddha himself. So in this way, there are differences, but they are often a bit more subtle, and for those who are really interested deeply in the Dhamma, can be very interesting. If you don't have so much time for this kind of study, don't worry. That's what I meant earlier. Having done all this comparative study, I came away now with the feeling, even if you just take the discourses, the Pali Suttas on their own, and just practice accordingly, you can get all the way to liberation. They are consistent enough, they are sufficient for our practice. But if you have this interest, like I have a little bit, I really want to know what the Buddha himself was teaching, and I want to find out the earliest, a little bit like the Sherlock Holmes, private detective, then this could be something interesting for you also. And often you can just, so for practice, I think it's maybe not always so important, but for general Dhamma understanding, the examples I've given earlier, I think they are very important. Think about the Bodhisattva path, Bodhisattva ideal, about the gradual disappearing of the asasana, about dismantling these beliefs. I think that is very important. Maybe last question here. Do you believe about the existence of Arhat in this modern world, according to your knowledge? Yes, I very clearly believe and am of the impression and understanding that even in our current time and age, the path can be practiced all the way to final liberation. And I'm also very much of the opinion of even having encountered and met some individuals like that. And in the end, who they are is not even so important. For you individually, the important thing is to understand, yes, it can be done, and then to do it. Just like the Nike advertisement, just do it. But yes, I'm very confident that all the Aryan stages can still be attained and are open for practice. Like the Buddha said, the doors to the deathless are open. But don't waste your time, they are closing. The time is getting further and further. We're getting further and further away from the Buddha himself. So the doors to the deathless are closing. Okay? So I leave you with that. Practice for liberation and wish you all the best along the way.
That concludes our broadcast for today. Should you have any concerns or questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we are confident that our programs on Buddha Dharma TV will inspire many peace seekers around the world. Good night, and may the blessings of the Buddha be upon you. Thank you. Namo Buddhaya.